We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings. This is Byrne. Evidently, it's a hard name to pronounce once you've seen it spelled. And it's especially true when people see it in my current town I'm living in, which is Tbilisi, Georgia. They don't call it Georgia, they call it Sakartvelo. But for us, they'll call it Georgia, or they'll call it Gruzia, which is what the Russians call it. But let's put aside that. Let's not talk about why I'm living halfway around the world from where I used to live in Alaska. I've made videos before. I've got another channel, The Anadromist Life. That's how you pronounce it. The Anadromist Life. And how you pronounce my name here is The Anadromist. So there. Now you know how to pronounce my name. Or at least the name I'm giving to the site. What does anadromous mean? It's based on a word used in biology, which is for to describe fish swimming back upstream to spawn. This is particularly comes from salmon. I used to live in Alaska, and so every year 5 species of salmon would swim back upstream, as well as a small fish, which we call the hooligan or ulakan fish, would swim back upstream. So it's anadromous. They turn and go back the other way. And I've been doing a website called The Anadromist Life for, I don't know, when did I start that? Probably about, what? Before 2009, maybe? Maybe I'm, no, 2009, 2010. I think about in 2009 I started a website, The Anadromist Life. I felt like I just had so much stuff that I've been meaning to get to writing for years and years and years. And I need to get it down somewhere because I was living in Alaska and my chance of getting it out there was slim. I'd spent quite a while thinking about different things, music history, art history, film, media history, technology and how it affects us, propaganda, the media, and quite a few other things. And puppetry ended up being something very important to me. And why? Well, that's a long story, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But I've decided it's time to start a new venture now that I'm living in Georgia and I've got certain things up my sleeve that I'd like to get out from under my sleeve. And not on my sleeve. So I've thought it's time to expose myself to YouTube, as it were, and time to talk, time to think about things. I've been watching the insanity of the mediascape, for lack of a better term, over the years. People are now starting to realize just how insane we have become in relationship to social media, technology, being spied through every available technological orifice. I've been thinking about these things for quite a while, since probably the late 1970s. I'm old enough to, it's like time travel back there to bring this to you. But one of the things that I thought was that, now actually I was never at all surprised. You know, like in the 90s, late 80s and 90s, people were saying, the media is going to bring us all together. That was just such a joke to me. I knew that the media, by media, they meant the internet. It was going to be this place where the free exchange of all ideas and people would be coming together. They would be connecting all over the world. And yes, I can go on a computer right now and type at someone or even Skype at someone and say Papua New Guinea. And you know what? Even if I've done a lot of reading on Papua New Guinea, I have no idea how those people are really living. Any more than I knew much about Georgia before I came here. I did do research. Don't get me wrong. The internet's an interesting place. We've created this fantastic thing where we can virtually travel all over the world and meet people. Meet people. We don't really meet them. So, but no, there wasn't 1 second where I ever believed the hype. Because I'd already read and thought about things enough by that time to know that it was an illusion. One of the people I'd read was Jacques Ellul, who is neglected by way too many people, probably because he's hard to read. He's French, died in the late 80s, and he was a sociologist coming from a Marxist background who then converted to Protestantism, but was a very, very hard to pin down thinker. But he wrote a book back in, I think it was originally the late 50s, early 60s. I think it was the book originally was the late 50s and took a while to be translated into English, called The Technological Society. He did a couple of other books, Technological System, The Technological Bluff. I'm purposely not giving you the French names for these just so it's not to confuse you right away. More importantly, he wrote a book, well, not more importantly, in addition to that, he wrote a book called Propaganda. Now, I was in my, in my late 20s in the early 1980s, and somewhere near the end of my 20s, I came across propaganda. And this was like someone just peeled the blinders from my eyes. I knew that, as we all do, there's something wrong with the world. But I knew also there was something very specifically wrong with this contemporary time. So it was different than other times. And so that book really affected the way I saw everything, because I realized we weren't communicating with each other through, we weren't communicating with each other through just normal discourse anymore. We were communicating with each other through propaganda. And this was before the internet. But what it was people would watch television or read a magazine or read a newspaper. They would digest a lot of the information, and this information was essentially with propaganda. You could tell it was propaganda because they wouldn't just have a normal dialogue. They would have a dialogue that was a predictable dialogue. And that's the problem, is that the dialogue became predictable. And once it becomes predictable, there are predictable us's and them's, predictable arguments. Now that, I myself am a Christian, but some of the worst propagandists I've ever met in my life were Christians, and I do not trust any form of propaganda. I can't stand anybody's propaganda. That is, and propaganda, you can always tell there's a knee-jerk reaction. There's a kind of there's a flavor to it. And the flavor is one of something already distilled. We know who the enemy is. We know who the villains are. And the enemy is never us. Whereas my feeling is the enemy is almost always us. Solzhenitsyn points this out. Speaking of Solzhenitsyn, brings us to an interesting figure in this time, and that's Jordan Peterson. I started watching him a couple of years ago. Shortly after, not immediately during, but a month or two after he kind of got in his hot water with the Bill C-16. I'm not going to go on a lengthy discussion about him, but he struck me as an interesting figure because he was trying to negate the polarization. And at that time, so many people were pumping up the polarization. It seemed like the mass media had just gone crazy. Trump had been elected, and people were just living, swimming in this. I mean, I could tell. I would meet people, and suddenly they would, if you mentioned politics at all, they'd get this like angry look on their face of the self-righteous, or they'd get this mockery. It seemed like there were two poles between the self-righteous and the mocking. And of course, the self-righteous are very easy to mock, which makes the mockers seem so unrighteous to the self-righteous, because that's how it works. And in a sense, the mockers are stronger because they are coming from a position of strength, even though they're actually in a position of weakness. It's a strange thing. I'm not going to go into that right now. What I started noticing was that the people who'd been pushed off to this corner, members of them started having a very interesting discussion amongst themselves. Atheists and theists, gay and traditionalists, old school feminists and Christians. Wow, that's interesting. And so whether listening to someone like Camille Paglia, to pronounce it correctly, or a Dutch Reformed pastor like Paul Vanderklay, or someone, I don't know, whether it's Joe Rogan, who definitely seems like a very non-religious person, or, interviewing someone like Peterson, who, let's call him religious, let's call him some kind of Christian, not sure what. But nevertheless, quite interesting. Quite interesting. And it's because of that I've decided to start talking and enter the conversation in some manner. See who listens, who wants to talk, because we need more people who are willing to discuss things. Because if we don't get it, I think people like Tim Pool are right. We will enter a new American Civil War. If we haven't, his thesis is that we already kind of have slipped into it. And there's a lot to be said for that. Certainly the war is in our heads. Certainly there's a propaganda war taking place inside of our minds. It's in there. So, we'll leave it there. This is just an introductory, what in the world I'm doing here. Haven't really told you much about myself. If you want to learn more about myself or what I think, I've got a couple of websites. You can go to The Anadromous Life, or you can go to my other site called Gravity from Above and check out those places. And apart from that, eventually I'll figure out, stuff like, getting a little bit of help funding-wise and things like that. I might put a PayPal link below this because those things would be helpful. But that's not what this is about. It's not about money. It's about conversations, and it's about dialogue. And it seems important that if we don't have the dialogue, well.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.